Meeting to order here. It's 5:03, and I know everybody has things they need to do. But before we get started, I'm going to ask Chairman Williams, if he will, to say a prayer for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dear Lord, thank you for another day. Thank you for the many blessings and opportunities you've bestowed upon us all. Dear God, please give us the wisdom, patience, and give us the courage to do and make the decisions as we need to make for the great state of Georgia and its people. In thy name we pray, amen.
Amen. Thank you. Thank y'all for being here. And again, as it was posted, this will be a hearing only. So we don't quite have our quorum here, but we don't have to have that for a hearing only. But we did wanted to get this conversation started and get this bill out there and learn what the chairman is wanting to do with this bill. I know it's been something that's been talked about for a long time, and there's a lot of folks, obviously, from the sign-up sheet that want to see it, but then there's some folks that don't as well. So that's what we're here, is to try to work through all that, and so we're going to turn the floor over to the chairman and allow him to speak to the bill, and then we'll take some testimony. And just before you get started, Mr. Chairman, I will say Stephanie is filling in for my admin, Jenna. If y'all know Jenna, she is, I guess, still in labor right now. We don't really know. So she's, so y'all say your prayers for her, and hopefully everything goes well. And she's going to be out for a little while, so we're going to be winging it. But anyway, keep her in your thoughts and prayers. So, all right, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the opportunity to bring Senate Bill 214 to the table, LC 473286, and in the famous words of Elizabeth Taylor, I won't be keeping you long.
All
right. The purpose of this discussion is to put a concept on the table that we have heard about for years. And it's a opportunity for us to consider accommodating some electors' request. It does not require any change at all to Georgia law. We're not going to change anything as is now, except we're going to add the option of requesting a ballot, an absentee ballot. I use that term to just describe the kind of ballot we're discussing. But to request an absentee ballot when you present yourself at a polling place during early voting period or on election day. We have no excuse absentee ballots in Georgia. You can request an absentee ballot for, you don't have to state a reason. The only caveat is you have to ask for that ballot 11 days prior to the general election date. So if the election is on a Tuesday, and normally, obviously, it's a Tuesday, so you got to back up to the second Friday prior to that date. We made those changes a couple of years ago. And the reason to make the change was to give people time to get the ballot, to vote the ballot, and to mail it in. So that's why we did that. So today, anyone can request an absentee ballot for any reason at all and not have to state a reason, but they just have to do it 11 days in advance. What this bill would do would be to allow an elector to request to vote an absentee ballot when they show up in person to cast their vote. They are checked in the same way you would be verified if you were casting a traditional, currently electronic ballot. So you've got to be a registered voter, you have to present an ID, you have to be verified as eligible to vote, but instead of being handed a card to insert into an electronic voting machine, you would be handed, if you request it, an absentee ballot, a ballot that has the same form and design and substance as an absentee ballot. That would require various versions of that ballot depending upon the precincts and how many different races might be involved there. I realize there's some logistical concerns, and one of the reasons why we're here today is to get those on the table and have this discussion. There could be a variety of ballot images. I would suggest that while is a bit of a problem, there are already in place methods that would allow election workers to meet that request. They certainly, as the committee knows, there's already the opportunity for emergency ballots. There's a certain amount of emergency ballots that are available at a polling place in case there's a loss of power or some kind of a glitch in the system. We've used those routinely to overcome that obstacle. There's also the ability to have ballot images available to be printed on request. I recognize the issue of trying to maintain control and ballot security, but this is again something I think we can overcome to accommodate the voter who might feel uncomfortable utilizing an electronic device. These ballots would, an absentee ballot would be put in an envelope. It would have the signature requirements. This bill, if you look, if you look on lines. Let's look quickly at the legislation. Let's first start in line 24. And just prior to that, 22 through 24. If the elector's name appears on the list of registered electors and he or she has presented proper identification pursuant to Code Section 212417, then such elector shall be entitled to cast an absentee on request ballot. So they don't have to, they can request it and then vote in that manner. In lines 26, an absentee on request ballot is on the same physical type of ballot that is used for absentee ballots pursuant to an existing code section. Lines 28 through 31 indicates that the ballot doesn't have to go in an envelope, doesn't have to be sealed, but on line 30, it shall be deposited by the elector casting such ballot in a secure sealed box. So we're looking at chain of custody there. And then finally, lines 32 through 34, upon the closing of polls and the last elector voting ballots cast pursuant to paragraph 1 of subsection A, which is the absentee on request, shall be tabulated in the same manner, or tabulated at the precinct in the same manner as is currently provided for tabulation of absentee ballots. So we're not changing anything. All we're doing is saying, if you're not comfortable voting electronically, we would authorize the ability to cast an absentee ballot on the request of the elector. That is the essence of the legislation. I'm happy to entertain any questions from the committee. I feel that with the dialogue that we've had over the last several years, this might help alleviate some of the concerns that some citizens have utilizing the electronic voting process.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a few questions here. Number 8.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, line 32 through 34.
Correct.
It says shall be tabulated at the precinct. Now, what we did in Baldwin County, we didn't tabulate absentees at the precinct. They were all brought to the central place where we tabulated everything.
So the tabulation center?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah, they were brought to the courthouse.
Okay.
And they were still sealed in the box, in the container. And they were brought, and then they were ran through that OptiScan at the tabulation center at the courthouse. So that's the only thing that I would say, that each precinct, I don't know that we want them tabulated at the precinct.
I thank you, and I thank the senator especially for his knowledge and expertise in the elections process. We're certainly open to making adjustments to make this a functional approach. That's why this is hearing only. We're looking for the type of input assist this bill in being implementable. So I appreciate the input and the
Yeah,
word
just like your
precinct.
provisional ballots, you
Right.
know, they're not tabulated at the precinct, they're carried to the
They're carried to
tabulation
the
center.
tabulation center.
Yes, sir.
Again, the issue certainly is going to be chain of custody and security of the ballots.
Right,
Thank
that's
you.
correct, yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Leader?
Following up on the Undertaker's questions there, how do you secure that ballot from the time you leave the precinct until you get to the tabulation center? The persons that have keys to the locks, are they going to have control of the box?
I would say currently we do that with provisional ballots. Is that not true?
Yeah, and your
And it's sealed, is it not? The precinct manager seals the box.
Yeah.
So it would be, if you look online, I'm looking for the line that says sealed container.
So it's already
It-
described already in Georgia
line,
law?
Yeah, line 30 says shall be deposited by the elector casting such ballot in a secure sealed box, lines 30 and 31. And I agree with the leader's concerns, and we are concerned about chain of custody.
Counting that ballot at that precinct, you have
It could be problematic.
no, it could be safer there.
Well,
But traveling from the precinct to town, 10 miles away, are you going to have one person in that vehicle, 2 or 3?
think
I mean,
that's
we get into the details of
operational
this
issue.
thing,
I
but-
do think we need a log that would indicate the number of ballots in the sealed box.
Which means
so
they
we
have
know
to
how
open
many
it to count it.
That box is sealed, and there's a tab on there that shows it's sealed. And if you open it, then you've got to break that seal,
Okay.
so it's tamper-proof.
So no
And
one
it's-
at the voting precinct could open it?
No,
Okay.
no. And it's just like the same for the provisional ballots. And you can actually turn in your absentee ballot at your precinct also. So, you know, somebody could walk in with their absentee ballot and turn it in at their precinct, so it would be handled in the same secure manner. So usually, you know, your poll manager brings your cards out of your machines and everything else to the tabulation center. So, yeah, we need to probably to step up that security, have law enforcement take over that, and them be in charge of transporting from the precinct to the tabulation center. That's what I've always
I
thought.
appreciate the input and the comments, and I agree with you. I think one of the most important things is if we were to allow for this type of an optional voting method, we must ensure that the containers are sealed and they're not tampered. But isn't that sealed essentially the same type of a system we would use for cargo containers that are shipped around the world? So that when I close that container and I seal it, if it's tampered with, I know it.
Right.
Is that not true?
Right, yeah, it's put a numbered seal on it.
Yep.
And if that seal is broken, then it's destroyed.
Which would invalidate every ballot in that box.
Exactly.
All right. Number 11.
That's me. Question here is that when we're dealing with the secured sealed, is there a requirement of the number of people that were there? Is it one person? Is it 2 people? Can we have a number of people? That would seem like at least
It
2.
would be the same number of precinct workers that would be there for
Okay.
normal voting
3.
processes.
Good.
3.
Okay.
Is that what I believe? Chairman
Every
Williams?
precinct, you gotta have 3 people, and that's for security.
And as I understand this, I could walk in, I could request a ballot, an absentee ballot. And I'm gonna say, this is almost paper ballot light, if you will. I have a paper ballot if I want one to vote that way rather than voting off the machine.
Certainly, the absentee itself is a paper medium.
Right.
And we're accustomed as voters in Georgia to, if we choose to, request an absentee ballot, which is a paper ballot.
Yeah.
And I point out to the committee and to those who are concerned, we already do this. The only issue is we have to do it 11 days in advance. We have to say, send it out to me so that I can vote it and mail it back. And as the chairman pointed out, I can bring that ballot in now, and I can just hand it in. So the only thing we're really changing is saying, I show up, I'm a verified voter, I request a ballot, you hand it to me, I vote it, and it's handled the same way.
Same way. Okay, very good. Thank you.
All right. Number 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A few questions. I like the concept. I believe in 2019, this would have been very helpful to have this debate.
We're finally getting around to a conversation, Senator.
Yeah, that's the point. Because what this is it's not paper ballot light. I mean, this is paper ballots. I think it's important to call it what it is.
It's an absentee ballot, which
It-
is a paper ballot. I realize that the word paper ballot has a certain connotation and a certain perspective, and I acknowledge
Yeah.
that an absentee ballot is a paper ballot. I would also say that I think a significant number of voters, like me, have a comfort level utilizing the current process. And I would be likely to choose the electronic option because I'm familiar with it. I will say I've talked to a number of election workers, and not all voters are comfortable with the electronic approach, and they need assistance, more assistance than I would hope they would. But I also acknowledge that what we have here potentially is 2 tracks. We have an absentee on request track, and we have what we will refer to as the Georgia electronic track. And that's going to create some logistical issues. And it could, and I know that this is a concern, it could create some delays in voting, but that would be a delay in voting at the option or at the choice of the elector. So if I choose electronic, I can move at this pace. If I choose absentee on request, it might take a little longer, but that's my choice. And I think this legislation simply gives the elector the choice.
But haven't we placed burden requirement on counties on the timing for counting and timing for reporting? And this would seem to counter that, especially because we're adding this additional burden of tabulating paper ballots that normally, in accordance with state law, we've told them they could tabulate before Election Day. Now we're adding
They
paper
can tabulate
ballots.
all absentee ballots. For example, I could go during early voting,
Yes.
and I could do an absentee on request during the early voting period. And correct me, those who know more, maybe we can ask the Secretary of State, but that would be the same as an absentee ballot that came in during that early voting period.
But this allows people on Election Day
Sure,
to request a paper ballot.
indeed.
So that means we have 2 methods of tabulation on Election Day, one that is very manual, one that is not.
You receive paper ballots, absentee ballots on Election Day. You would accept an absentee ballot if I walked in on Election Day and handed it to you. You would accept an absentee ballot on Election Day if it were mailed in on Election Day. So I concede we don't know what the volume might be, and this could create a volume issue. I got it. And I think the committee has to weigh, and the Senate and the legislature has to weigh whether or not that burden is reasonable.
One we could bear.
One we could bear, given the fact that we give the voter the option.
Two more quick questions.
Sure.
One about a logistical question.
Sure.
Because in lines 18 to 21,
Yep.
it says that for advance voting, you can walk into an early voting location
Yep.
and ask for your ballot
Yep.
in paper.
Yep. Absolutely.
So I understand your argument about provisional ballots
Sure.
on Election Day. Each precinct has provisional ballots that are assigned to those precincts. If a voter can go to any early voting location in that county, then that precinct would have to have access to
A
however
variety
many.
of ballots.
And in some counties, like DeKalb, for example,
Sure.
there were 500 different
A
ballots.
large number of various ballot images. I concede that.
So then the worker would have to find the right image, get that printed,
Perhaps.
and then
And I acknowledge that presents a challenging operational issue. And I would just respond to the senator by saying, do we create legislation that is in the best interest of the citizen, or do we create legislation that is the best interest of the system that services us, the employee? And I'm not against, all my friends are election workers, and I recognize and acknowledge that, but I don't see this as a stretch. This is not it's not an overreach. It's an opportunity for us to consider accommodating voters.
yeah. Last question: if this bill passed, who do you see paying for implementation of this?
Again, a very good question. And historically, it's been borne by the communities. Although certainly back when we implemented our current system, the state stepped up and spent an enormous amount of resources providing equipment and training to provide a standardized approach toward elections. And I recognize and acknowledge that has certain advantages, certainly certain operational advantages and certain training advantages and certain timing advantages. But to answer your question, the cost will be in providing the alternative medium. So instead of an electronic medium, it would be a paper medium through the image of an absentee ballot. I think part of the issue is how many Georgians would prefer this method, and I can't answer that question. I think we've had a number of years of experience with our current system. At least my level of I should say estimation or hope is that the vast majority of Georgians are comfortable with the current voting method and they would continue to use it. A small number of Georgians say, I'm not going to use that device, and some of them might walk away and say, I'm not going to vote, or some of them might walk away and say, I'm frustrated, or I don't have confidence. So I think this is just a way to give the elector that alternative. And I totally agree with you, and certainly Senator Williams, who's conducted these elections. It creates some operational challenges, and that's why we're having this discussion. Okay? Let's lay it on the table. Let's talk about it. Let's hash it out. Let's get input. Let's see if it makes sense. That's all I ask.
Vice Chair Williams.
If I could address some of your questions too. And walking into any polling precinct, polling place on election day and requesting, that would be absolutely impossible. There's too many different ballot styles. And they couldn't have that many different ballot styles at every precinct. Maybe if you show up at your precinct where you're supposed to vote, so that ballot style is already there. Those are the emergency ballots on hand. But the cost, there's not really any more cost, because even though you can open the envelopes and you can start counting early, the mail, we had them bring in ballots all during the day from the post office, the mail carriers. And they would come in usually around 5:30. They would come in with the last ballots, and then we would count them and tabulate them at the end with the others. And you use an OptiScan, which has been in use for many years, to read those ballots. So it's not the Dominion machines, but I can't see it really being any more different. The provisional ballots that are there, they're all tabulated, and you've got all that tabulation stuff at the tabulation center. So, we don't want to put more on our election workers. They're my friends too. I've worked with them for 17 years. And a lot of them have my cell number, and I don't want them blowing me up. But, and they know where I live. But, yeah, it's trying to make it easier. And I ran this past some of my election workers, and they told me, well, it's not any different than a provisional ballot now, so it really doesn't matter to them. And this is in some of your smaller rural counties.
And, well, just really quickly.
Yeah.
I think, Mr. Chairman, I think that's the key difference here is that we're not talking about day of provisional ballots. We're talking about the fact that the bill allows you to walk into any early voting location in that county and to request a paper ballot. So you would have to have.
I don't agree with that part. That's the
Oh,
part
okay.
would
You're
have
just
to
saying.
be-
Okay,
No,
I just want to make
I'm
sure.
not taking that part.
Let
I'm
me
saying
say-
that's impossible.
Every large counties have a larger number of advanced voting locations. Smaller counties might have one. So out of 159 counties in Georgia, probably 140 or so would have a very limited number of advanced voting locations. There would certainly be an issue in some of our larger communities because they would have multiple early voting locations. And as you pointed out, Senator, and as Senator Williams pointed out, there could be a pretty large variety of ballot images, and that creates some heartburn, no doubt. And that, again, I would point out to the committee 2 or 3 simple just observations. That absentee ballot has no code on it that is not human readable. So anything on that ballot, you and I can look at it and we can say with pretty good reason, this is how the elector intended to vote. This system would give you 3 levels of oversight. You've got the physical document, you've got the tabulated count, and you've got the scanned image, which is available for verification. So, in my mind, it adds a level of oversight and of security. And if those 3 don't match, then you need to investigate and resolve concerns. But it just seems unreasonable to say you can have it in 11 days in advance, but you can't have it today. Okay? Why would I give it to you on the Friday before, the second Friday before the election day for no reason at all? And I show up on the Monday of the Monday before election day, the second Monday before, which is an early voting period, and say, no, you can't. You can't use this tool. You can't use this method. So anyway, it's worth the conversation.
So I got a couple questions, Mr. Chairman. So if I go to a precinct that has all these ballots, how do I know that I'm being handed the correct ballot if they've got multiple ballots?
Absolutely a key question. Thank you. We have, and I know it creates an issue for the operational side. We have to ensure that the poll workers understand the various images that they're having to deal with. I would be candid and say I'd rather not have a stack of paper. Okay, I'd rather not have 1,000 different versions. I would rather have an image that is linked to a voter, and that image is printed on that request, so that you get the ballot from the system. So as soon as I provide my election ID and they know which precinct I'm in and they know what races I'm eligible to vote for, I would receive the ballot at that time. We currently, and I think Chairman Williams pointed this out, we currently have provisional ballots and we have emergency ballots. The vast majority of those pre-printed ballots are destroyed. Okay? So we print them, we don't use them, we destroy them. And I would suggest that creates some control issues in and of itself, because you have a number of potentially large number of pre-printed ballots that, if they fell into the wrong hands or were used inappropriately, could be a challenge, be a problem. However, we've got such good controls now in Georgia. I have total confidence in our voting system. I have total confidence in the in the integrity of that system, and I think we can secure those ballots. We already secure provisionals, we already secure emergencies, we already secure absentees, we already secure electronic voting options. So, I would hope that we could deliver the correct ballot to the correct person for that election cycle.
So if would we have to maintain the same number of current machines in all of the precincts that we do today?
That would totally depend upon how many electors chose the absentee on request. It could be fewer. It would certainly not be more. I wouldn't think it could be more. So it's possible. And we already recognize that because of early voting, that the number of machines that are required, electronic voting machines that are required on election day, is less than what would have been required prior to the move toward the early voting cycle. We're still at somewhere around 50% or so of votes cast in the early voting cycle, and so I would think that we could reduce the number of machines if appropriate.
Okay. Any further questions from the committee? I don't see any, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the committee for their consideration. I look forward to the input from the public.
All right. Well, let's get started with that. And we've got a pretty good list here, so try to keep it around 2 minutes. Cindy Battles. People's Agenda.
2 minutes, got it. All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak on this bill. My name is Cindy Battles. I am the Policy Director for the People's Agenda. So 2 minutes, I am going to try and hit some of my biggest points. To your question, Chairman Watson, you would actually still have to have the same number of machines because there's a statute in Georgia that says you have to have so many machines per voter, and since you can't determine how many voters are going to request this, you not only have to have the same machines, but because of line 42 where it says sufficient ballots and enclosures so as to allow electors opting to cast a ballot pursuant to this code, etc., you would have to kind of figure out how to have those machines and then also have some sort of enclosed area so that they could vote with the absentee ballots. There's also, I have a question. Are we bringing drop boxes back? Because he read line 31, but it doesn't say sealed box. It says sealed ballot box, which kind of sounds like a drop box to me, and we got rid of those. Also, because you have the ability to request an absentee ballot on site, are we then undoing what we did in SB 202, which is changing the deadline to request an absentee ballot?
No.
You're going into the area to request an absentee ballot, right? So you have fundamentally kind of by the letter of the law. That might not be the spirit or the intent of the law, but that's what you've done. And then my other question is, since you're allowing,
Hold on. Let's
Sorry.
address that real quick.
okay.
Mr. Chairman.
If I could, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Battles, we currently require the absentee ballot be requested because of the mail delay in delivery.
And
If-
the curing process,
Well, the curing process happens after the ballot's received.
right? I understand.
Okay. So this legislation would allow an elector to make that request when they show up. It could be 11 days prior to the election. It could be 15 days prior to the election. It could be at some point in time prior to that. But at the end of the day, you're not going to be mailed the absentee ballot. You would be handed it, and you would choose to vote it at that time. Now, and you pointed out about machines. If you recall, we adjusted the statute so that the election official could could reduce the number of machines based upon the number of early voting numbers. So that if I had 10,000 individuals that I needed to accommodate, I have to have 250, I have to have a machine for every 250 people. However, if 5,000 of those 10,000 had already voted, I don't have to have 250 for 10,000. I have to have 250 for 5,000.
I do recall. I actually do recall that
Good.
because you and I had
You had that conversation.
We have had many conversations
Absolutely.
about that. But they can come in during early voting to request this, correct?
Sure, they can, and then that would net out as just as an early voting option. They are voting early. They are simply voting on a different format. Okay.
Correct. But you cannot predict on election day how many people will want to request an absentee ballot.
You are correct.
You are like you.
You are correct.
Right.
And that's why I think it might be more operationally feasible if those were not pre-printed, but be printed on request. The absentee on request be printed when the elector shows up. And so all I have, I shouldn't say that. What I have to have is blank paper to provide that accommodation.
Okay, but then you still, according to line 42, you not only have to have sufficient ballots, you have to have sufficient enclosures. I'm talking about space. And how
I
you're
got
going
it,
to manage.
and I think you're right, and I've had conversations with elected officials about that. We have a certain number of machines now that have the enclosures. This would be a different area where they could vote and protect their privacy and their secrecy.
Mm-hmm.
I recognize that it might require more space.
Okay. Also, you brought up curing. It says on line 38, it seems like there's no cure process for these absentee ballots.
If the absentee ballots, when they are scanned, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
If the absentee ballots, when they're scanned, if there are stray marks or if there are questions about that ballot's, that elector's intent, that's when they would be cured. It's the exact same process we use right now for absentee ballots. It would happen at the tabulating process, the machine tabulation. I want to emphasize that. This is the same machine tabulating process we currently use. It is the same curing process for a ballot that has stray images. And I acknowledge that this opens up the door to have a need to cure ballots, cure more ballots. But I would also say it gives you a ballot to look at that the person marked themselves, and you can make a better determination of their intent.
Respectfully, Chairman, just because I hear what your intent is, and you may want to look at the wording on 30.
Happy to look at the wording and make appropriate
Yeah,
adjustments.
it just looks like there's no cure process for the. I think if that's the intent, then I think it's the wording.
Okay.
I recognize I'm probably a little over my 2 minutes. I just want I don't understand. I've heard what you said about. First of all, I'm with you. I'd be happy if the state would invest in being able to print provisional ballots, emergency ballots, and absentee ballots on demand. We've actually asked for that before, so I fully support that as long as the state's paying for it, not the counties, because we've already talked about the infrastructure. I think currently the system, the way that you'd have to implement this is you would have to have pre-printed provisional ballots or pre-printed absentee ballots, and having to have those on top of the other ballots. There's no way that's not an additional cost to counties, and considering the fact that the House is sending y'all a bill. I had to remember which chamber I'm in. The House is sending y'all a bill to eliminate Saturday voting in municipal elections to cut cost because elections are so expensive in Georgia. At what point are we going to stop passing unfunded mandates or increasing the cost of counties to elections and them having to restrict voter access? Where is the balance? So I think that's my final point, and then I'm sure other people will make great points, and I appreciate the opportunity to have some of my questions answered.
All right.
One more question, if I could, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely.
Battles, you for it or against it?
What?
Are you for it?
Oh.
Are you for it? Or are you against it?
Again it. I'm against it.
You against
I'm
it?
against it. I'm against it as drafted.
I'm
but I
trying to
think there's
get
a number
to
of
for
issues.
it.
Okay, well, you and I can, you have, and respectfully, Chairman, he's already had one conversation with me. I fully believe that I can walk into the chairman's office and we can discuss this again. But currently, as it is drafted, especially since my big thing these days is the crumbling infrastructure and how we need to fund elections in Georgia differently, and the reporting that I am giving y'all about the increase in cost from 2018 to 2024, I am against this bill.
Thank you much.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Rachel Lastinger, ACLU, Georgia. And if you will, make sure you keep the microphone up close there. Just
Yes, a little bit taller than Cindy. All right, thank you. Rachel Lastinger. Rachel Lastinger, Voter Access Project with the ACLU of Georgia. I want to be clear that I'm not here to speak about the pros and cons of paper ballots or absentee ballots being requested at voting locations. What I want to talk about is the financial repercussions of this bill and what it will really take to implement this bill as it's currently written. I also want to point out that there was incorrect information earlier about absentee ballots being returned at the precincts on election day. This is not allowed. All absentee ballots need to be received at the Board of Elections by 7 p.m. to be counted. If an absentee ballot is at the precinct at 7 p.m., then they're not at the Board of Elections by 7 p.m. and legally cannot be counted. So I just wanted to clarify that. But I want to make sure that we understand what a county will have to do to make SB 214 possible as it's currently introduced. So Georgia currently does not have on-demand printers. Like, these are special printers that would be required for this effort. You cannot just use any printer to print a ballot. You can't use the printers that are already there with the BMDs. Some counties do have one of these printers, but smaller counties don't need to currently have one, and they don't. And they cost up to $22,000. Like, these are not cheap printers because they're very special printers. Counties will either have to purchase one of these, and they might have to purchase one for every single voting location with the way this bill is written. Or, as Cindy mentioned, they will have to pre-print numerous copies of multiple bill types in case a voter shows up wanting to vote via absentee ballot. These ballots have to be printed on special security paper. Just one ream of this paper costs $60. So let's look at Gwinnett County. You have 147 different ballot types in Gwinnett County. In Clark County, you have more than 90. And even in smaller counties like Barrow, you can have up to 30 different ballot types during the primaries. So if we look at Gwinnett County, where there are 12 early vote locations, say they prepare 10 of each of their 147 ballot types, that means they have to have more than 17,000 ballot types prepared in case someone shows up requesting an absentee ballot, because they can't print them on demand with the way our current system is. So all counties we have spoken to, both rural and metro, believe that this would at least double their current election cost. Let alone the financial burden counties also have mentioned a concern for the extra space that would be needed and for extra staff that would be needed, as you would need at least 2 extra staff to solely handle these types of ballots. And why am I concerned about this financial burden? I've been closely tracking precinct closures and consolidations over the past month or so. Most of these are occurring for cost-saving reasons, which I can't blame the counties for. I get it. In Oconee County, they are down to just 1 polling location during early vote in Election Day, which means that voters from rural parts of the county have to travel to the county seat to vote. And again, I get it. They have to make these really tough decisions because they're under financial constraints. So we have also repeatedly witnessed counties reduce their early vote hours or opt out of optional weekend voting to save money. And this legislative body also made several attempts to reduce the early voting period, stating it's to help counties save money, yet we also want to place this huge financial burden on the counties. So our county election officers are already under significant financial constraints and therefore have to make difficult decisions. Financial constraints on counties have a direct impact on voter access. And this is why I'm concerned about this bill. The voters are who will suffer from the unintended consequences. Thank you.
all right. Thank you, Rachel. And just for the committee's knowledge, these are all folks that are opposed. So next we have Tate Fall, Cobb County elections. Yeah, in case y'all were wondering.
Already knew.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for having me. My name is Tate Ball, and I'm the Director of Elections for Cobb County. I've been in my role about 14 months, and just prior to coming to Cobb County, I worked in Arlington County, Virginia, and so I want to start off by telling you a little bit about that. In Virginia, we did use hand-marked paper ballots, so I'm very familiar with this process, and there is a way to do it well, and I think we did it well in Arlington, and I think that we could get there, but in this current state, there's a lot of really key things missing, so I just want to touch on that from an election administration purview. So when looking at a county like Cobb, as was mentioned earlier, or larger counties, last May when we had our partisan primary and nonpartisan general election, Cobb County had nearly 2,500 ballot styles. So if there wasn't a provision that allowed for counties to use ballot-on-demand printing, imagine my 14 early voting sites with 10% of the voters, 2,500 different ballot styles, accommodating for Republican ballots, Democrat ballots, and nonpartisan ballots. And then a voter checking in, right, which this doesn't quite outline what that check-in process looks like. Are they going to check in on the poll pad? Are they going to fill out a voter oath? What is that going to look like? And then I'm going to ask a poll worker to go find the correct ballot and make sure that that voter is getting the correct ballot. So really difficult for a county our size without the use of a ballot-on-demand printing system, which is what we used in Virginia to make sure every voter got the correct ballot. An additional concern with having those ballots pre-printed is how to secure those ballots across 14 sites across 3 weeks, right? Some of our sites are parks and rec facilities. Most of them are, where we're not the only ones that have keys to that gym or keys to that storytelling room in the library. So that's a concern. We can seal the boxes, of course, but what happens if they're broken into? And then we have a lot of questions being asked. And the last thing we want to do is introduce a system that could call into question the integrity of our elections, because we've all worked so hard to build that trust back with our voters. I think a big difference that we noticed as election officials in reviewing this between the current ABM process and what's proposed in this bill, what really outlines a difference of what is the absentee by mail process, is mentioned on lines 28 through 29, which says that no envelope will be used and that the voter will directly cast their ballot into a sealed ballot box. So what that happens is that eliminates the ability to cure that ballot, because that's their secrecy, right? If that's not in an envelope, an oath envelope, like what they fill out for ABM, when they put that naked ballot inside of that ballot box, we have no way of knowing whose ballot that is. So if there is an issue with that ballot, we can't cure it, right? So I think that that's a concern that we have there. Part of the tabulation processes that are referred to, laid out in 21-2-386 and 21-2-483, a big piece of that is a vote review panel. So when we scan a ballot, whether it's an absentee by mail ballot, a provisional ballot, any type of hand-marked paper ballot, and it gets kicked back for a stray mark, or they overvoted, maybe it's a blank ballot, whatever the case is, a vote review panel reviews that ballot and determines if they can see voter intent, right? And then they can duplicate that ballot. A duplication panel then does that. So a vote review panel is made up of a representative from whatever parties are on the ballot. So in a bipartisan election, a Democrat and a Republican, as well as a member of our office. We have a special Democrat runoff in our commission district coming up. So in those vote review panels, it's just going to be a Democrat representative and a member of my office. So if these ballots are being scanned at the precinct on election night, which is how the current code section that's referred would allow those ballots to be scanned at the end of the night, that would mean the parties would be responsible for appointing vote review panelists to every single polling place in every single county. So in Cobb County, that'd be 148 members from both the Republican and Democrats in a bipartisan election, and then nonpartisan candidates could also send people to participate. So that's a concern that we have there, since most of our partisan people are there serving as poll watchers, and then they go to their parties at the end of the night. That also raises the question of the delay of results, right? So if they're having to scan all of these ballots at the end of the night, then that's going to delay our results on election night. And as y'all know, we have to get our results in by 11:59 p.m. Otherwise, I get a really, really angry phone call from the Secretary of State's office. And I could see this being very popular in Cobb County and having thousands of our voters voting this way because that's their desire. They've made that clear to me as their director. And this could delay our results in a county my size. And so ideally, there would be a system like what we had in Virginia where the voter themselves is placing that ballot through the scanner. That way they know right away, if it's rejected, I need to review my ballot. Maybe I need to get a new one because I made a mistake, right? And that gives them the confidence of knowing that ballot went through the scanner, my vote counted. Not poll workers are scanning those ballots later, or those ballots are being transported and scanned by election workers, right? We're trying to build that trust back, and I worry that that could damage that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your input. I appreciate your knowledge and experience. And one of my questions, I think you've already answered. So, in your experience in Virginia with this use, you did have absentee. You had ballot on request printing. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
And then instead of it being put into a box, into some kind of a quote unquote secure box, and then subsequently tabulated, the elector scanned their ballot at that point and immediately had a verification that their ballot was read correctly. Is that right?
That's correct, sir. That's how all of our voters voted in person unless they needed to use the ADA machine, a ballot marking device, for accessibility purposes.
So the only time you used the ballot marking device, the BMD, was for accessibility purposes. Is that
That's
right?
correct.
Which
Yes, sir.
I think if we go back in history, Mr. Chairman, that was kind of our original idea, the intent in Georgia, and it became the standard as opposed to the alternative. Does all of Virginia use this technique?
Yes, sir. So Virginia is unique in that the purchase of the equipment is actually done at the locality level. So the county gets to decide what equipment they want to purchase. So we all use different equipment through the certified vendors through the state. We used Unison and No Ink, who we use No Ink as well here.
Yes, we do.
But that's how all counties were. All counties and cities in Virginia used hand-marked paper ballots. And then, of course, under HAVA, we all had ADA machines at every site as well.
So you had those machines there for accessibility purposes.
Yes, sir.
But so each county could determine which vendor provided the ballot images and then the scan.
The
Is that-
scanners, yes, sir. So we.
But they all had to link up. Can you? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize, but in the tabulation process, were you efficient in the ability to provide results using this technique?
So I think the fault of Virginia's system being at the local level is that we had to hand enter our numbers in our election night reporting system because we all use different vendors. So there wasn't an upload system that we had like what we have here because we're all in the same system.
We're all in the same system, so we get a bit of the ability to consolidate those numbers is much more automated. Is that a fair
Yes, sir.
statement?
Like Senator was mentioning earlier about the memory cards being uploaded.
Right.
We would hand key those numbers in at the end of every
Well,
night.
let me. I have some concerns about the memory cards because if I want to make adjustments, the memory cards might be the potential. I appreciate your input, and I look forward to continued dialogue.
Happy to have
Thank you.
conversations. Thank you.
Thank you.
See, number 5, Senator, 35th.
Sounds like the Virginia model is interesting.
That's one word for it. Yes.
Yeah,
Very different.
hand-marked paper ballots
Yes.
is what it is. How much does Cobb County spend on elections a year?
Our annual budget is a baseline of $6.5 million, and then in even years, I usually get a contingency between $2 and $2.5 million.
So somewhere between $6 to $8 or $9 million.
Yes, sir.
And do you agree with the previous speaker that this could potentially double those costs?
I think we already have a lot of infrastructure at our level that would prevent some of that. We would have to purchase ballot on demand printing for nearly all of our precincts, which would be a lofty cost up front. But we already spend a pretty exorbitant amount of money on the 10% of emergency ballots that we have to provide at precincts. So that can cost us anywhere between $250,000 to $500,000 a year in ballots that end up getting shredded because they're not used. So if we could maybe counteract that requirement with ballot on demand printing, I think in the long run, if the infrastructure stays the same and we don't change vendors in a couple years, it could end up in a county my size, saving us money. In a smaller county, it would be a pretty large cost to someone like that.
Yeah. And would you agree that this is what we're essentially talking about here is a hybrid system where voters get to choose between electronic ballot and a paper ballot?
That's my understanding. I think the only difference would be when the ballot is scanned. So that's really what's going to be the difference here is that voter confident that if they put that ballot in a ballot box versus a scanner, are they confident that their vote is going to end up being counted correctly? I think that's the only thing. Voters know when it goes through that scanner that their vote was counted, and this system would possibly interrupt that and cause for questions.
And from an operational perspective, as a director, would your preference be to have a hybrid system like this, or would your preference be for us at the legislature to choose between paper ballots, hand-marked paper ballots, and the current system that we have, electronic voting system?
I think end goal would be to have one uniform system. That way all voters know they're voting the same way. I think coming from Virginia, being here in Georgia, there are pros and cons to both systems I could tell you about all day. But I think uniformity and letting all voters know that they're voting in the same manner is really important for that unity aspect. That way it's not called into question, well, those ballots were counted, but these ballots weren't, or whatever, that narrative might become. I think the end goal should be a uniform system.
Vice Chair Williams.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you being here and sharing that information. And I'm like Chairman Burns, I'd like to pick your brains some more and to see what we can get better. Thank you.
Happy to do it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that's all the questions.
Thank you,
Thank you for being here. Kristen Nobles?
Oh, it's my bad handwriting. I'm Kristen Neighbors.
Neighbors. Sorry.
Hello, Chairman. My name is Kristen Neighbors. I'm the State Director for All Voting is Local Action. We're a nonpartisan organization that advocates for policies and legislative priorities that expand voter access. I realize the language of this bill may seem simple on its face, but as I think we've already discussed here, the devil's in the details here. I think everybody in the room would agree that voters should have options, and in fact, my organization works year-round in support of policies that increase access for every Georgia voter. But implementing this bill is where the trouble starts. Previous speakers have already talked about the difficulty. You're either going to have all the different ballots in boxes around the corner of the room while people are voting. That is a security nightmare. It is a chain of custody nightmare, or you've got to buy these very expensive on-demand ballot printers. But I also urge you to carefully consider who is behind this bill. Is this bill supported by election officials who actually know how elections are run, or is it being pushed by a small group of activists who've been spreading lies about our elections and about the hardworking public servants who run them? I said at the beginning that voters should have options, and Georgia voters are very lucky in that they can choose between voting on a ballot marking device with a paper backup or voting via a hand-marked paper ballot. A voter in Georgia can request an absentee ballot, which is filled out by hand. They can mail that ballot, return it in person at the election office, or use a drop box. So even if this bill didn't create new problems, which it does, it's an unnecessary solution to a problem that does not exist.
All right. Don't see any questions.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right. Let's see who's in favor of this. Victoria Cruz.
Good evening, committee members. My name is Victoria Cruz, and I'm a retired physician, 28-year resident and voter in Oconee County. If I heard Oconee County mentioned before as having only one precinct, we have 4. I think maybe that was a different county. Oconee has 4 precincts, not 1. I want to thank you, Senator Burns, for bringing the bill. I think this discussion had to be opened up. I know, like you, I also get a lot of people who question the QR code in our ballot system. And what this discussion has already proved to me is that there are some hurdles that have to be overcome before any system like this could be implemented. But it also, listening to how the Virginia system is done, it also shows me that our system is probably, I almost want to say it's the worst of all worlds, because of all the machines are the same in all the counties. It has to be uniform, and there are some hurdles with the absentee ballot system. I myself vote by absentee ballot. I I am perfectly capable of going to a polling place and voting there, but it has been my practice for the last few years to request an absentee ballot because I'm in the older age category. I get ballots for the whole election season, and it's very simple for me because I request one time and they're sent to me. I understand that's not what happens to all voters, and I don't have to rely on a QR code. I think what can be improved in the current system that we have, we do have no excuse, but I just wondered, have always wondered why we could not get the absentee ballot at the election office if we wanted to get that up to the day of the election. I mean, if that to me would be something that would be a lot easier than trying to have all those ballot styles, especially in the big county. I live in a small county. It's not an issue with all the different ballot styles. But not having to rely on the post office would be wonderful, going out or coming back in. I always return my absentee ballot to the election office because I want to be sure it goes from my hands to the people who are going to be responsible for tabulating it. And that obviates all that chain of custody problem. I didn't realize there were so many ballot styles at the primary time, so that would be a problem without printing on demand. I also want to point out that not only do we have voters who don't like the QR code, I hear that a lot, but at the recent state election board meeting, there were several cases where machines weren't working, either the e-poll books or the ballot marking devices. Polls opened late, and people were given the option to vote on paper. And some people just walked away and said they will not vote on paper because paper ballots have also gotten a bad reputation in various elections where the paper ballots disappeared. You know, they weren't counted because of that chain of custody problem. If you cannot control the chain of custody and you have election workers who are maybe not as compulsive or honest, or something happens, then the paper ballots don't get counted, especially people who are asked to vote provisional. You know, they always wonder, is my provisional ballot going to count? Or they don't come back to cure them. So there's problems with the paper ballots as well. What I hope comes out of this bill may not pass this time, I understand. What I hope comes out is that we do examine the system, the type of system we have right now that forces people who, you know, kind of forces people into a certain type of voting on the same kind of machine. And it's basically a black box where you don't know if your vote was tabulated correctly in the QR code. The QR code has got a very bad reputation. The Secretary of State doesn't appear to be willing to take it off at this point unless millions and millions of dollars are funneled into this system that's almost at the end of its life. So I understand there are some hard decisions to make, and I hope this discussion helps you.
All right, thank you, Victoria. Stephen Alizine, I don't know how to say your last name here. Stephen, sorry I butchered that up.
It's A-L-E-S-H-I-R-E, Alshire. Thank you.
Okay.
My name is Stephen Alshire, Athens, Georgia. I support this bill allowing paper ballots at the request of the voter. Paper ballots are the first incremental step to freeing voters from the tyranny of the electronic voting machines. I'm also a retired physician. I have a background in healthcare IT, and I was an engineer for several years. I understand computers as well as any of you guys, I think. The machines at every step from voter roll lookup by the no-ink poll pads to the Dominion ballot marking device, and then on to the scanner tabulator, all can be electronically manipulated. The aggregation of data insultingly by CITL in Spain, of all places, then returns it to the local Secretary of State office for another attack vector for insecurity of these devices. Every machine in every polling place in Georgia has an internet, a Wi-Fi, or a Bluetooth connection. Even your neighborhood thermostat can be accessed, as has been demonstrated previously in multiple, even in the legislature's areas of demonstration. Sorry. The electronic connections have been repeatedly proven. Choosing a paper ballot is equivalent in process to an absentee ballot, and at least this avoids the unreadable QR code that has been mentioned that Raffensperger seems to refuse to remove. My opinion is that this again likely represents a point of attack to possibly manipulate or change the outcome. Please support this bill, or one like it in the future, I hope. It is at least a first step toward a fair and transparent election. Not to get biblical, but I view these machines, despite what I feel is a fairly sophisticated background in education, I view these machines as an abomination in the election process. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Stephen. All right. Next, we've got Garland. And do y'all want to come up here together and tag team this, or we can knock it out?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Tamara Favorito, and I'm representing Voter GA, which is a nonpartisan organization that has led the election integrity movement here in Georgia for now nearly 20 years. And I want to thank you, Chairman Burns, for carrying this bill that allows in-person voters to cast hand-marked paper ballots. We have more than 20,000 supporters and followers who agree that in-person voters should not have to use an unverifiable, illegal voting system that hides their votes in a proprietary QR code that they can't read even if they have a QR code reader. A district court found that in 2020, the Dominion BMD system does not produce a verifiable ballot, nor are ballot choices in human readable text as required by Georgia law. The Georgia Supreme Court ruled in the 2020 Roden case that this system's ballots must be marked by pen or pencil and hand counted, and this system does not comply. After these cases were ignored, the General Assembly passed SB 189 to further provide that QR-coded vote accumulation should not be used in Georgia. However, Secretary Raffensperger just last week, I think it was, recommended to the Appropriations Subcommittee that they not allocate funds to comply with this law. So it seems obvious, especially after the discussion today, that the best thing to do is have all voters cast hand-marked paper ballots and send the BMDs to the Computer Museum of America, which is right in Roswell. We could keep those that are needed for access, of course. So while there's a few details that we need to make here, ballot on demand being one of them, where to count the ballots, where to tabulate them, we would agree with you, Senator, that they need to be in the precinct. But regardless, HB 214 is sorely needed. And I think what we need to hear from the opposition to this bill is how are voters going to be able to cast a legal, verifiable, in-person ballot in the next election. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Garland.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Tamara mentioned, we would normally urge a do pass today on this bill if it was being voted, because ballot on demand would solve the problems raised by Senator 35th and Mr. Chairman, as you as well. While this bill circumvents the problems with the Dominion ballot marking device, I want to make sure the committee is aware of other security problems that the scanners and the servers that must be addressed either in this bill or in another bill soon. Number one, the Dominion system was never legitimately certified and cannot be federally certified. It stores encryption keys in clear plain text in violation of the federal requirements under which it was allegedly certified in 2019. The system is programmed and maintained in Belgrade, Serbia. That's a national security issue for all of us. The Georgia County servers were accessed remotely by Dominion during our 2020 general election and the 2021 U.S. Senate runoff. The only Georgia County election server ever analyzed had an uncertified compiler that allows a bad actor to change the software after it's installed without detection. That same election server had 3,000 files modified without detection after the installation, which should have voided its certification. Number 6, the system allowed ballot images to be electronically altered prior to certification of the 2020 election results. And finally, an authenticated copy of a Georgia election server was hacked in court to show how thousands of votes can be flipped with just 6 lines of code. These are not my opinions. These are actual facts based on expert witness testimony, limited forensic analyses, and court documents. In addition, no forensics were ever conducted after the system failed to count properly in the 2020 and the 2022 election cycles. So I just want you to be aware, we still have a security crisis and a national security crisis with this system. And what the voters want to do is to cast a legal, verifiable, secure ballot. That that's what the opposition is not understanding. That's what our 20,000 supporters want.
Sorry, question here for Senator 35th.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Favorito, I don't want to go to, in fact, I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole with some of the allegations that you
it's not a
lodged,
rabbit
but you are urging for a due pass on this bill. Are you not concerned with some of the chain of custody and security issues that we've pointed out?
One of the main concern which was a very valid concern, is the issue around we need ballot on demand to make this work the best. That is one. And as we already mentioned, we think everybody should be casting on a hand-marked paper ballot. I've heard a lot of technical issues today. I have not heard anyone address the issue of how the voter is going to be able to cast a legal, verifiable, and secure ballot in the next election. That is what 5 million voters in Georgia want. It's not a technical excuse as to why this can't be done. We have to get to the point where we recognize that the security issues in this machine and the legality issues and do something.
And I don't have a quarrel with hand-marked paper ballots.
I know.
I'm a fan of hand-marked paper ballots. But we have a system here in Georgia that we've invested a couple $100 million,
yes,
not even counting what counties have invested.
Yes.
And what this advocates for is essentially a hybrid system when in reality we should be deciding one or the other and just go with it. My concern is you're advocating for a due pass here when there are security loopholes and issues that I believe you have been identifying in the same in the electronic systems.
Yeah.
We've identified some of those same issues here, and I'm concerned that you're advocating for one, not the other, with the same kind of issues.
Yeah, I understand. We're not voting on the bill today, so that's one thing. But to your point, in 2019, we recommended to Secretary Raffensperger, before he ever became Secretary of State, not to buy a QR-coded voting system. We argued against this, mandating ballot marking devices in 2019 and 20 when the system was purchased. And we've tried to explain these problems before, even when the system was under evaluation for a year. There was a massive outcry against QR code voting because nobody knows what's in the QR code. That's actually what's accumulated. So there's a pent-up frustration amongst millions of voters and at least our 20,000 supporters over the last 5 years, and they're not getting the attention of the elections officials because the elections officials are more concerned about other things that you've heard before, and I appreciate what they do. But the issue here is that the voters have to be able to cast a legal, verifiable, secure ballot, and the opposition doesn't want to recognize that this cannot happen in the next election unless we have some change. So we are we're perfectly willing to hear any other change that you make that the voters could cast a legal, verifiable, secure ballot. That's really what it's all about.
Let me just jump in here. And I think there's some really important points that have been brought up today, and that we can work on this. Some of the things about scanning in the precinct, I think that takes care of having to have a vote review panel at the end of the day or later. So there's several things that we can talk about. I think it was a great idea to have a hearing and work on it more. But we want you to know we support this because this is a step in the right direction. We want all hand-marked paper ballots.
All right. Thank y'all. All right, last one. Thank the committee for their patience. We've got one more speaker, Dr. Janice Johnson, State Elections Board. You're the last speaker, so just FYI. They've been very patient committee here, and it's late, so.
Thank you for accommodating me. I wasn't going to speak, and I very much appreciate it. Thank you very much. But perhaps I can answer some of your questions for this proposed SB 214. First, you need to know that 3/4 of the states use hand-marked paper ballots, 3/4 of the states in the country. The cost of this proposal would actually prevent a great deal of the cost of repurchase of Dominion voting machines that have been proposed for $66 million. The voting machines, the voting system in Georgia, DVS, or Dominion Voting System, increased the cost of our elections by 400%. And a ballot-on-demand printer is not $22,000, it's $800. So there's an OKI ballot-on-demand printer that costs $800. The size is small. It's just like your printer that you might have at home. It's about that same size. And it can accommodate the 2,500 ballot styles that Cobb County was speaking about. Fulton County, the largest county in the state, has 30 early voting sites. So the ballots would be scanned. They would be printed with printer-on-demand printers, and they would be scanned at the precinct, just like the BMD ballots. Okay, so early in-person ballots would use the ballot-on-demand printers, and they would have, of course, the precincts would keep the 10% reserve emergency/absentee/provisional paper ballots that are pre-printed as usual. Any unclear marks would cause the scanner to reject that voter's ballot. So it would be, they would cure their own ballot. You would not need teams of cure teams. On election day, pre-printed ballots would be used. So the ballot-on-demand printers are not necessary for election day in the precincts because you know what your precinct is, you know what your ballot style is. So those would be pre-printed, probably by Tatnall Printing down in Reidsville, Georgia. Also to let you know, not only does Virginia use, or Tate Fall described the Virginia process, Florida has the same hand-marked paper ballot voting, and they also have a choice of 4 or 5 vendors that they use for their scanners. And I personally watched the election in Orlando, which is a pretty good-sized city, and they handled it beautifully at a much more cost-effective way to hold an election. I could talk about the pros and cons of Dominion or printing or voting on paper ballots, but I just wanted you to know it's a very doable proposal, and whether you use the hybrid model, that is up to you. I don't know if that's an idea that might transition to one way of voting, but currently we do vote on hand-marked paper ballots with all of our absentee ballots. So it's not like we don't vote that way now. It's just that 30% of our state or our voters vote that way now. And this would just offer the opportunity, if a voter comes into a polling place, that they would have the option to vote with a hand-marked paper ballot.
All right. A few questions here, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you. I thank Dr. Johnson. I appreciate the input, especially on your work, not only the State Election Board, which I'm grateful for, but also your work to look at how other states have effectively used either a hybrid model or a paper-based hand-marked ballot. So you have that experience and that those insights. In Georgia, we have a percentage of people who currently request this absentee ballot via the mail in the traditional way. It depends, really, I think, on the election cycle. I'm not. Are you comfortable with the fact that 30% of Georgians currently vote absentee?
Am I comfortable with it?
I'm just saying, do you feel good about that number? Do you think that it's that high? I think it was that high back during COVID.
It depends on whether you're talking about, yes.
Yeah, I think in COVID 2020, I think it was higher.
Right.
But I think today it's much lower. Is that not true?
So I think in this last election, the combination of absentee by mail voters and early in-person voters tipped the scale to about 60%.
Right. But those early in-person voters were limited to utilizing the electronic system. Is that not true?
Beg your pardon?
The early in-person voters in the last cycle were limited to just using the electronic option.
If you present to vote in person in Georgia, you have to vote with a ballot marking device and a printer.
That's correct.
Correct.
And I do agree with you. I think as we explore this a little bit further, I appreciate the input from Virginia. I appreciate your insights from Florida.
Alabama.
But being able to print those on request is important. And I do agree and concur. I much prefer, as opposed to putting them in any form of sealed container, I'd much prefer that elector scan their own ballot. And they scan that ballot, and if, as you point out, if there's a need to cure it, they cure it themselves. They don't rely on a
then and there because it's rejected by the scanner.
Correct.
Okay, as an incomplete mark or an unreadable mark or an unreadable ballot.
Thank you for your work, and as we continue to explore this, we'll look for ways to find the right combination.
Correct, and that would satisfy the security issues as far as what I heard questions about putting in envelopes and driving it to another place and then scanning it at another time. The point is, these are scanned just like our ballots are scanned now when we go to early voting. So they're dropped into the the garbage can looking box, and they're secure just like the ballot marking device ballots. Right. And as always, the question about security, Senator Estevez asked about, security is always important, no matter what the voting system. So it's always a prime importance. And chain of custody is important, even with even with these ballots too. And you must have careful ballot accounting, okay, paper accounting and ballot accounting. So, you need to know how many ballots were printed with the ballot on demand printer, and you need to know how much paper is left in that to make sure you've accounted, because you're using valuable paper, as I understand, watermark paper, right? And so you want to account for every piece of paper, just like you would if you were a banker. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Senator, do you have a question from 35th?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and I just want to make sure that I'm clear that I do support, and I like the concept of hand-marked paper ballots, but I also strongly support that the state take one approach to that, and that we do it right. Either way we go, that we do it right, that we have high-performing systems And like you mentioned, the difference between an $800 printer and a $2,200 printer can make a big difference. 22,000, sorry. We saw in Arizona, reports out of Arizona talked about how they purchased initially the OKI printers and probably purchased them for $800 instead of $22,000. And the following year, following election, they had to upgrade their printers because there were multiple breakdowns on election day because the cheaper printers could not handle longer ballots and thicker paper for security reasons. So I just want to make sure that whichever route we go, that we're using high quality products and that we're not taking this stuff too lightly, because the decisions we make here have significant impacts, particularly on our counties.
Right, so the ballot-on-demand printers would only really need to be used in early voting. And smaller counties would not need to use ballot-on-demand printers because they're smaller, they have fewer ballot styles, so they can already pre-print the ballot styles and they may only have one early voting location. So they would have all their pre-printed ballots to accommodate the number of voters that are in each precinct in their smaller county. They already have them, and they actually keep them in a closet. And they're packaged in packs of 50, so they open a pack of 50 and use it. So it's not necessarily, but it would be necessary for Cobb County. It would be necessary for Fulton County and DeKalb County. And it depends on how many early voting sites you have, is how many of those printers. And those printers will easily handle 25,000 ballots. And then, the quality may decrease after that.
All right, I don't see any more questions, so that wraps us up. And good debate, and appreciate the members being here and their patience at this late hour. And Mr. Chairman, you got a little work to do, so look forward to seeing more. So thank all y'all for being here. We're adjourned.